Is a second term for Donald Trump a risk or reward for the global economy? How would his America First policies impact international trade, inflation, and America's role in the world? In this video, we'll explore the potential consequences of Trump's proposed economic strategies, from tariffs to deregulation, and how they might shape the global economy. By examining insights from economists and experts, we'll break down what a Trump victory could mean not only for the U.S., but also for businesses, markets, and nations around the world.
Welcome to our deep dive into the potential economic ripple effects of a Donald Trump victory in the upcoming election. Imagine you're watching a giant web, with every strand representing a part of the global economy. When one part of the web shifts, all the other threads move too. This is particularly true for the US, one of the world's largest economies, where any major policy decision echoes across the globe. In this episode, we'll explore what Trump's America First agenda might mean for the interconnected economies worldwide. Let's start with a big question. What does America First really mean in economic terms? At its core, this phrase signifies Trump's commitment to prioritize American industries, jobs, and security. The idea, in theory, sounds appealing to many people within the US, as it suggests a stronger focus on creating domestic jobs and reducing reliance on other countries. But Trump's approach also leans heavily on protectionist policies, like imposing tariffs, which are taxes on imports, and promoting American-made products. Although this could benefit some U.S. industries, it creates complex challenges on a global scale. To understand the significance, let's break down why U.S. policies have such a big impact globally. First, the U.S. is deeply intertwined with other countries through trade, finance, and investment. American companies rely on materials and products from across the globe, and businesses worldwide depend on U.S. consumers. The U.S. dollar is also the world's reserve currency, meaning it's widely used in global transactions, investments, and as a benchmark for other currencies. When the U.S. economy shifts, the shockwaves can affect jobs, prices, and trade balances all over the world. But Trump's America First policies don't exist in a vacuum. For example, his administration has shown a preference for imposing tariffs on foreign goods to protect American businesses. However, these tariffs come with a cost: higher prices on imported goods. So, let's say Trump were to apply a high tariff on steel imports. That might benefit American steelmakers, but it would likely raise prices for U.S. companies that use steel, such as car manufacturers. Higher costs for companies mean higher prices for consumers, which can lead to inflation, an issue that economists around the world are already concerned about. Why are tariffs so contentious? Economists generally view tariffs as a double-edged sword. On one side, they can protect domestic industries from foreign competition, but on the other, they tend to reduce efficiency and raise costs. Imagine if every country tried to impose high tariffs to protect its own industries. Trade would become more expensive and restrictive, limiting choices for consumers and slowing down the flow of goods. In a worst-case scenario, retaliatory tariffs could lead to a trade war, where countries keep raising tariffs against each other, stifling economic growth globally.
One of the big claims from Trump's campaign is that his economic policies would boost stability and prosperity. But many experts argue that his approach could actually create more uncertainty, especially in international markets. When countries rely on each other for trade, sudden shifts in policy can disrupt established partnerships and create tension. For instance, countries like China, Canada, and the European Union, which are major trading partners with the US, might respond to Trump's tariffs by imposing their own, targeting American exports. This kind of tit-for-tat retaliation can hurt economies on both sides, making things more expensive for everyone involved. Another significant aspect of Trump's economic platform is his vision for the US dollar. While he hasn't provided specifics, he has hinted at policies that could weaken the dollar, which would make American exports cheaper and theoretically boost sales abroad. However, a weaker dollar could also have unintended consequences. For instance, it could increase the cost of imports, contributing further to inflation. It could also lead international investors to lose confidence in the US economy, potentially impacting global markets. When the dollar fluctuates significantly, it can send shockwaves through economies worldwide, affecting everything from the price of oil to the stability of foreign investments. Economists, financial analysts, and policymakers around the globe are watching closely. Many worry that Trump's economic approach could lead to higher inflation, slower global growth, and increased financial volatility. Even before we reach the potential effects of tariffs, the mere uncertainty surrounding these policies can be destabilizing. For instance, investors tend to seek safer assets when faced with uncertainty, which can lead to fluctuations in stock prices and even impact interest rates. Higher interest rates can slow down spending and borrowing, which is crucial for growth in any economy. This brings us to an interesting debate within the economic community. Is America first sustainable for the US and the global economy? Supporters argue that focusing on domestic industries and reducing dependency on foreign goods is a long-term investment in American workers and businesses. Critics, however, believe that isolationist policies ignore the benefits of globalization, which allows countries to specialize in what they do best and trade for what they need. They argue that when countries cooperate and trade freely, it leads to more growth, better prices, and more innovation.
So, what does all of this mean for you, me, and everyone else in this interconnected world? Simply put, any major shift in US policy, particularly one as dramatic as America First, could have far-reaching implications. It could affect everything from the cost of goods to the value of investments and even job opportunities across the globe. As we continue this series, we'll explore each of these aspects in more detail, helping you understand the potential impact of Trump's policies on trade, currency, jobs, and economic stability. Stay tuned as we dive into the heart of this topic in the next episode, Trump's use of tariffs and how this controversial tool might reshape trade dynamics worldwide. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our deep dive into Trump's economic vision and its global implications.
We'll dive into one of Trump's most prominent tools in his America First agenda, tariffs. During his presidency, Trump leaned on tariffs to shake up global trade relationships, aiming to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. But while tariffs might protect some American industries, they also come with significant drawbacks both for the U.S. and for the international economy. To put it simply, tariffs are taxes placed on imported goods, which make these goods more expensive. By raising prices on foreign goods, Trump hoped Americans would buy more domestically produced items, giving U.S. industries a boost. But there's a catch. Take steel tariffs as an example. When Trump raised tariffs on imported steel, it helped U.S. steel makers by making foreign steel more expensive. However, American companies that depend on affordable steel, like car and appliance manufacturers, had to pay higher prices, leading to increased costs for consumers. One of the most notable targets of Trump's tariffs was China, the world's second-largest economy. The Trump administration argued that China was engaging in unfair trade practices, like intellectual property theft and market manipulation. To counter these practices, Trump imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. This move led to a trade war as China retaliated with its own tariffs on American exports. The trade war affected various sectors, from agriculture to technology, and created global uncertainty as both countries scrambled to protect their interests. The ripple effects of these tariffs spread across the globe, impacting markets, supply chains, and everyday consumers. Higher tariffs on Chinese goods meant companies had to adjust to rising costs. For example, U.S. tech companies that rely on Chinese components faced higher production expenses, which often resulted in higher prices for consumers. Small businesses also felt the impact as they struggled to absorb these extra costs without passing them on to customers. Now, let's talk about the broader implications of Trump's tariff strategy. Supporters argue that these tariffs pushed other countries to rethink their trade practices and treat the U.S. more fairly. In particular, Trump's hardline stance encouraged renegotiations of trade deals with countries like Mexico, Canada, and Japan. His administration even replaced the NAFTA agreement with the USMCA United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which aimed to create fairer terms for American workers. However, critics argue that these tariffs ultimately hurt American businesses and consumers more than they helped. Economists warn that protectionist policies like tariffs can lead to inefficient markets, higher consumer prices, and fewer choices for consumers. And in a globalized world where supply chains stretch across borders, disruptions in one country can have far-reaching consequences for businesses around the globe.
In addition, tariffs create tension and uncertainty in international relations. Take the US-China trade war, for example. As both countries piled on tariffs, businesses and investors around the world faced uncertainty about what products would cost and where they could source materials affordably. When markets face uncertainty, they become volatile, which can lead to drops in investment, slower economic growth, and, ultimately, fewer job opportunities. One of the most critical concerns with tariffs is that they can trigger retaliatory actions. As seen in the trade war, China responded to U.S. tariffs with its own, targeting American products, especially in agriculture. Many U.S. farmers faced significant losses as Chinese buyers looked elsewhere. This cycle of tit-for-tat tariffs often leads to what economists call a trade war, which can spiral into a damaging standoff with no clear winner. An interesting angle to consider is how tariffs affect developing countries. While the US and China have robust economies, smaller, developing nations rely heavily on free and predictable trade flows. When large economies like the US impose tariffs, it can disrupt global supply chains, hurting developing countries that depend on selling raw materials or manufactured goods. Some argue that tariffs can force these smaller economies to suffer the consequences of trade tensions between economic superpowers. Despite the challenges, there is some evidence that Trump's tariffs have led other nations to reconsider their trade approaches, especially concerning China. Many countries, wary of over-reliance on a single country for key materials, have begun diversifying their supply chains. This shift, sometimes called the China Plus One strategy, encourages companies to source products from multiple countries to avoid the risks of tariffs and trade restrictions. In summary, Trump's tariff policies aim to shake up the global economy in ways that would benefit the U.S., but the results are mixed. While some American industries received a boost, the cost for consumers and the economy as a whole has been significant. Tariffs also create tensions with other nations, risk escalating trade wars, and contribute to global uncertainty. In the next episode, we'll explore another key area of Trump's economic vision: immigration reform, and its impact on the labor market and economy. Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe for more insights into Trump's economic policies.
In this episode, we'll dive into a major pillar of Trump's economic agenda: immigration reform. Immigration is a complex issue, impacting everything from labor markets to public services. Trump's approach to immigration was a cornerstone of his America First vision, aimed at protecting American workers and securing borders. However, these policies sparked intense debate, with questions about their real economic impact and the ripple effects on communities and businesses nationwide. Let's start with an overview of Trump's primary immigration policies. First, his administration took a hard stance on illegal immigration, increasing border security and implementing stricter policies on asylum seekers. This approach included the construction of the border wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, a project heavily promoted as a way to curb illegal entry. The administration also implemented the Remain in Mexico policy, requiring asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their cases were processed, aimed at discouraging people from making dangerous journeys to the U.S. For legal immigration, the Trump administration tightened requirements for certain visas, such as the H-1B visa for skilled foreign workers. These reforms intended to prioritize American workers for high-skilled jobs, especially in fields like technology. Many supporters believed that by reducing competition from foreign workers, American job seekers would have a better shot at securing employment and higher wages. However, this approach raised concerns in industries heavily reliant on skilled immigrants, such as tech and health care, where there are often more job openings than qualified American applicants. The economic rationale behind these policies was to protect American jobs and reduce the strain on social services. Advocates argued that high levels of immigration, particularly illegal immigration, can lead to lower wages for American workers, especially in industries with many low-skilled jobs. By restricting immigration, the Trump administration hoped to reduce this competition and boost wages for native-born Americans. But the impact of immigration on the economy is complex. While limiting immigration might reduce competition in some job markets, it can also lead to labor shortages. Many industries in the U.S., from agriculture to construction, rely on immigrant labor to fill essential roles. In agriculture, for example, immigrants make up a significant portion of the workforce, performing jobs that are often seasonal, physically demanding, and difficult to fill. When immigration policies tighten, these sectors can face workforce shortages, potentially leading to higher production costs, supply chain issues, and ultimately increased prices for consumers.
For high-skilled industries, limiting visas can also be problematic. The tech industry, for example, relies heavily on skilled immigrants to fill roles in areas like software development and engineering. By restricting the number of H-1B visas, Trump's policies made it harder for U.S. companies to attract the talent they need to stay competitive globally. Critics argued that these restrictions could discourage companies from setting up shop in the U.S. and lead them to hire talent abroad instead. Another significant area affected by Trump's immigration policies was public spending on social services. The administration argued that reducing immigration would lessen the burden on public resources like healthcare, education, and welfare programs. However, studies on the economic impact of immigration show a mixed picture. Many immigrants contribute to the economy by paying taxes and filling roles that help businesses operate. While undocumented immigrants are often excluded from most public benefits, they still contribute to state and local tax revenues, which fund public services. Beyond the economic implications, immigration reform also affects America's demographic and cultural landscape. The U.S. has a long history as a melting pot, attracting people from around the world who bring different skills, ideas, and perspectives. Immigrants not only contribute to the economy but also to the nation's social fabric. Critics argue that harsh immigration policies may harm America's reputation as a welcoming country and could limit the diversity of perspectives that drive innovation and creativity. Another consequence of Trump's immigration policies was the impact on family reunification. The administration implemented stricter criteria for family-based immigration, prioritizing skilled workers over family members. This shift affected thousands of immigrants who hoped to bring family members to the U.S. and was especially difficult for families who had been separated by borders. Critics argued that this approach ran counter to American values of family unity and compassion. Supporters of Trump's policies believe that immigration reform is necessary to maintain law and order, reduce competition in the labor market, and ensure that the U.S. can provide for its citizens first. However, opponents contend that these policies overlook the economic and cultural contributions of immigrants and may ultimately harm industries that rely on immigrant labor. The question remains, how do we balance national security and economic protection with the need for an open, diverse society? In conclusion, Trump's immigration policies reshaped the U.S. economy and job market, with both supporters and critics voicing strong opinions. While these policies aim to put American workers first, they also introduce challenges for industries dependent on immigrant labor and raised concerns about America's identity as a nation of immigra, NTS. In the next part, we'll explore another crucial area of Trump's economic agenda: corporate tax cuts and their effects on businesses and average Americans.
In this section, we'll delve into one of the most debated aspects of Trump's economic policy: corporate tax cuts. When the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act (TCJA) was signed in 2017, it lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, marking the biggest change to U.S. tax policy. The idea was straightforward. By reducing taxes on corporations, businesses would have more money to invest, expand, and hire, ultimately boosting the economy. Proponents of the TCJA argued that cutting the corporate tax rate would help American companies compete globally. Before the TCJA, the U.S. had one of the highest corporate tax rates among developed nations, which some argued made American companies less competitive. Lowering the rate aimed to encourage businesses to reinvest profits domestically rather than move jobs and operations abroad to escape high taxes. So, what happened after the TCJA was implemented? In the short term, many large corporations reported significant tax savings. Companies like Apple and Amazon saw billions added to their bottom line due to the lower tax rates, and some used these funds to boost shareholder dividends and buy back stock. Stock buybacks, where companies repurchase their shares from the market, tend to increase stock prices, benefiting shareholders. Supporters of the tax cuts saw this as a positive outcome, arguing that higher stock values benefit a range of Americans, especially those with retirement accounts or investments. The rationale was that boosting corporate profits would make companies more valuable, indirectly benefiting employees and retirees through higher stock prices. However, critics argued that the benefits of the tax cuts were not widely shared, as most stock ownership is concentrated among wealthier individuals. On the job market, the results were mixed. Some companies did use their tax savings to invest in new equipment, facilities, and hiring. Industries like manufacturing saw slight boosts in employment as a result, and the U.S. experienced a period of low unemployment following the cuts. However, the direct impact on wages was less clear. While supporters of the TCJA hoped that companies would pass their tax savings on to employees in the form of higher wages, wage growth remained modest. Critics of the corporate tax cuts argue that while companies enjoyed lower taxes, the benefits didn't significantly trickle down to workers as promised. Another key part of the TCJA was the repatriation provision, which offered tax incentives for companies to bring overseas profits back to the U.S. American corporations held trillions of dollars offshore. And it was hoped that bringing these funds back would lead to domestic investment and job creation. While some companies did repatriate profits, critics argue that much of this money went toward stock buybacks rather than major investments in new U.S.-based jobs or infrastructure. The TCJA's impact on the federal deficit has also sparked debate. While corporate tax revenue initially fell after the tax cuts, proponents argue that the growth stimulated by lower taxes would eventually offset revenue losses. Critics, however, highlight that the national debt increased significantly in the years following the TCJA, pointing to concerns that the cuts added strain on the U.S. budget and limited funding for public services. From an economic growth perspective, the tax cuts did coincide with a period of strong economic performance in the U.S., with GDP growth accelerating and the stock market reaching new highs. Supporters see this as evidence that the TCJA succeeded in stimulating the economy, while opponents contend that the long-term benefits are less certain, especially for average Americans who may not directly experience the gains. For small businesses, the TCJA included tax breaks and deductions, which aimed to boost small business growth and encourage entrepreneurship. Some small business owners benefited from these changes, though critics note that many of the most significant tax breaks were geared toward large corporations rather than smaller enterprises. As we move forward, the question remains, was the corporate tax cut worth the cost? While it undeniably provided relief to many U.S. businesses, the extent to which these benefits reached everyday workers and small business owners is still debated. Additionally, the impact on the federal budget and national debt remains a pressing issue, with discussions ongoing about whether the U.S. can sustain the financial implications of these cuts. In our final part, we'll look at the broader impact of Trump's economic policies on trade, international relations, and the long-term future of the American economy.
Welcome to the final part of our series on Donald Trump's economic policies and their potential global implications. Today, we're tackling his trade policies, their effects on international relations, and what all of this could mean for the future of the American economy. One of the central pillars of Trump's economic philosophy is America First, a strategy aimed at prioritizing American industries and workers. This approach has led to a focus on reducing trade deficits, promoting domestic manufacturing, and protecting U.S. industries from foreign competition. Central to this vision has been his use of tariffs, a tool he views as essential to recalibrating the U.S. trade landscape. Trump's love of tariffs has made him somewhat of an outlier among modern presidents, who have generally leaned toward reducing barriers to trade. During his first term, we saw Trump impose substantial tariffs on steel, aluminum, and especially on Chinese goods, sparking what became widely known as the U.S.-China trade war. The goal is to pressure China into adjusting its trade practices, which Trump and his supporters argue are unfair and harmful to U.S. businesses. However, economists widely agree that these tariffs have had mixed results, both for the U.S. and the world economy. While the tariffs aim to support U.S. manufacturing, Many argued they've led to higher costs for American consumers and businesses that rely on imported goods, especially those with Chinese supply chains. The tariffs also caused other countries to respond with their own trade barriers, hitting U.S. exports in industries like agriculture. For American farmers, who export large portions of their products, the trade tensions with China and other trading partners created challenges, leading to billions in losses. In response, the Trump administration rolled out subsidies to help offset these impacts, but the long-term effects of these trade policies are still uncertain. From a global perspective, Trump's trade approach has created waves. Allies and trade partners have expressed frustration with what they perceive as a more insular and unpredictable U.S. trade policy. Traditional allies in Europe, Asia, and North America have found it challenging to navigate the sudden shifts in tariffs and trade agreements. While Trump supporters believe these measures were necessary to level the playing field, critics argued they risk isolating the U.S. from global supply chains and trade networks, ultimately putting the American economy at a disadvantage.
An additional point of debate is Trump's plan to impose further tariffs if he is re-elected. Economists argue that further tariffs could push prices even higher and lead to inflationary pressures at home. The interconnected nature of the global economy means that any significant changes in US trade policy affect not only Americans, but also global markets. Looking ahead, it's essential to consider the broader consequences of Trump's trade strategy. If the US continues to focus on unilateral tariffs and protectionist measures, it risks straining relationships with key economic partners and reducing its influence on global trade rules. Other countries might increasingly look toward forming trade alliances that exclude the US, potentially weakening its economic leadership on the world stage. In conclusion, Trump's economic policies, whether it's tax cuts, tariffs, or deregulation, have sparked both enthusiasm and concern. His supporters see his strategies as a way to revitalize American industries, protect jobs, and make the US more competitive. Critics, however, worry that these policies could lead to more economic inequality, higher national debt, and a more isolated America on the world stage. Thank you for watching this in-depth series on the potential impacts of a Trump economic plan on the global stage. If you found this content insightful and want more breakdowns on complex economic and political topics, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell.